Hello, my name is Ryan Gehrmann, and I would like to present the results of my preliminary study on the acoustic correlates of pseudoregister in Pacoh. So, what is pseudoregister? The short answer is it's like conventional register, except that it has different historical origins and different developmental potentialities, and we will get more into the details of that below. I'm aiming to address 3 research questions in this study. Firstly, can a pseudoregistral interpretation of Pacoh vocalism be confirmed empirically via acoustic analysis? Secondly, what are the acoustic correlates of the pseudoregisters in Pacoh? And finally, how does Pacoh pseudoregister fit into a typology of pseudoregister formation and evolution? And why are we interested in this? Well, we need further documentation of this pseudoregister phenomenon. There is qualitative and historical phonological analysis available on some of these languages, but the quantitative phonetic analysis is lacking. I'm interested in modeling pseudoregister formation, where these things come from. And it also has implications for the reconstruction of Proto-Katuic vocalism, which is the branch of Austroasiatic to which Pacoh belongs. And there's outstanding questions about whether or not Proto-Katuic itself may have been pseudoregistral. So this presentation is divided into 2 parts. In the first part, we'll introduce Pacoh, and I will present to you the acoustic analysis of its vocalism that I've undertaken. And then in part 2, we will discuss pseudoregister more in depth and the implications of the Pacoh findings for a model of pseudoregister formation. As I mentioned, Pacoh is an Austroasiatic language of the Katuic branch, and it is spoken in the mountainous border regions between the central highlands of Vietnam and Laos. Pacoh vocalism has been described by Watson. He divides the language's 30 vowel phonemes into 15 vowel quality positions, doubled for pseudoregister. He himself referred to this pseudoregister contrast as a retracted tongue root register contrast, by which he meant the high register was characterized by a retracted tongue root position and the low register by an advanced tongue root position. And he described the high register as creaky or raspy, and he explicitly compared it to Sedang's high register. Sedang is a Bahnaric language, the high register of which is characterized by a strong laryngalization or creak in the vowel. So for this project, I took digitized tape recordings, which Watson graciously offered to me. Those recordings are dated to August of 1972, so they're of moderate quality, but sufficient for our purposes. They contain 303 words, spoken once each in isolation by a single speaker. So the data was segmented in Prot, and acoustic measures were extracted with Prot sauce, and data visualizations were created with the Plot9 package in Python. I set out to investigate the acoustic correlates of the proposed pseudoregister contrast in Pacoh. So I looked for the usual suspects for register, which include vowel height, measured in F1, pitch, measured in F0, various spectral tilt measures, and then septral peak prominence and duration differences between the 2 registers. It turned out that only vowel height, pitch, and one particular measure of spectral tilt, H1 minus H2, covaried in any way with the pseudoregister contrast. Okay, so here we have box and whisker plots measuring average F1 of long vowels. These are averages across the middle 50% of vowel duration, and pairs are arranged from left to right here. So we see that F1 differentiates the members of each pair quite reliably. Some vowels are missing from the data set. Here we have the same F1 plot, this time for short vowels. And once again, register pairs tend to be well differentiated in terms of their F1 values. Here we have smooth scatter plots for F0 and H1 minus H2. We have the average of all words in low pseudoregister in blue and all words in high pseudoregister in red over normalized time here. And we can see that there is a tendency for pitch to fall in the high pseudoregister, especially towards the right edge of the word. And we see that there is a tendency for voice quality to become tenser towards the right edge of the word. That's indicated by the falling measure of H1, H2 here. And I'll draw your attention to the H1 minus H2 measures here, which are all negative. So we're not dealing with breathy voice here at all. We're definitely dealing with different levels of tension, presumably moving creakier in the high pseudoregister. And here we have the same F0 and H1 minus H2 plots from the previous slide, but this time divided by vowel length, long across the top, short across the bottom, and manner of articulation of coda consonants. So moving from left to right, glottalized codas, sonorant codas, oral stop codas, and voiceless fricative codas. So the general trend from the previous slide is visible for some of these combinations. So we see here the opening chopsticks pattern. But then for other combinations, we see that the trend weakens or disappears entirely. So it seems to indicate to us that differences of pitch and differences of voice quality are only expected in certain combinations of vowel length and coda manner of articulation. So just to quickly summarize the results of the acoustic analysis, we find that vowel height measured in F1 is the primary correlate of the pseudoregister contrast. It's reliable and it differentiates all pseudoregister vowel pairs in all environments. Pitch and voice quality, on the other hand, while they do covary in predictable ways with pseudoregister, they appear to be secondary. They're only reliably associated with pseudoregister in certain environments. And we found a stronger correlation of pitch and voice quality with pseudoregister among long vowels and among glottalized codas and among sonorant codas. In other environments, they tended not to covary with the pseudoregister contrast. Now we can return to our first two research questions, which were, can a pseudoregistral interpretation of Pacoh vocalism be confirmed empirically via acoustic analysis? Or in other words, are there identifiable, reliable correlates which bind together the different proposed pseudoregisters? And my answer is yes, but not unequivocally, because there are identifiable correlates which bind together the pseudoregisters, but only vowel height is reliable, which indicates a shift in progress from a pseudoregister contrast marked by a bundle of different features to a purely segmental vowel height contrast. And question 2 was, what are the acoustic correlates of the pseudoregisters? Clearly vowel height, and then pitch and voice quality, though less reliably. Okay, moving into part 2 of the presentation. We've talked a lot about register and pseudoregister, but let's back up and talk about what that really means. So I define register as a binary suprasegmental contrast, which is upheld by a certain suite of naturally covarying phonetic cues, which I call the register bundle, or a subset thereof, which frequently arises to enhance and ultimately replace historical onset voicing contrast. So I include the point of origin in the definition here. because the changes to the onset voicing are part and parcel to the kinds of changes that happen in a register language. So here we have the register bundle marked by differences in voice quality, vowel quality, and pitch primarily, although others are possible. And these are arranged into the high register and the low register. So the high register is descended from voiceless onsets, and the low register is descended from voiced onsets. Now pseudoregister is almost register. The first 2 points in the definition apply. It's a binary suprasegmental contrast, and it's upheld, at least at the beginning, by the register bundle of cues, the same way register is. But the difference is it is not descended from historical onset voicing contrasts. So to define pseudoregister, we can keep points 1 and 2 from the register definition before, and update point 3 by changing the point of origin from historical onset voicing to historical vowel quality contrast. And it's typically vowel height that is the most important factor here. So we've got the segmental word doc here with a contrast of high pseudoregister and low pseudoregister. The high comes from an open vowel here, and the low from a non-open vowel. And indeed, it is vowel height that is the determining factor in pseudoregister formation. Historical close vowels develop low register, historical open vowels develop high register, and mid vowels are variable. And this eventual emergence of pseudoregister contrasts arises from natural covariations that exist among the 3 primary register cues. So pitch, voice quality, and vowel height. And interactions between those 3 are well known. There's some literature here on that. And I believe pseudoregister emergence may be encouraged by contact with conventional register languages, although that is a question for the future. Now, getting into pseudoregister typology, I mentioned at the top that there are some developmental potentialities for pseudoregister that are not available to conventional register. And this has to do with the opposition of lax-marked pseudoregister, as I call it, versus tense-marked pseudoregister. So lax-marked pseudoregister is very similar to register. The low register is the more marked in terms of voice quality, so the low register is breathy in a lax-marked pseudoregister, and the high pseudoregister is an unmarked modal voice quality. But pseudoregister has shown a propensity to shift to the tensor and become a tense-marked pseudoregister. In that case, the high pseudoregister shifts from modal to creaky, and the low pseudoregister shifts from breathy to modal. And this kind of shifting is entirely unattested in conventional register languages. So we have a number of examples of tense-marked pseudoregister languages. One comes from the Bahnaric branch of Austroasiatic. Central Sedang is the language. 2 come from the Katuic branch, the Oi, and our language here, Pacoh. And a number from the Pacoh branch, most especially the Zhang language, which is well described. And what's interesting is that all of these tense-marked pseudoregister languages, all the ones we know of, they also all have the devoicing of historical voice stops in the onset. Now, the pseudoregister is not conditioned by that. The pseudoregister is separate. It comes from historical vowel height contrasts. But there's a secondary devoicing of voice stops in all of these tense-marked pseudoregister languages, which is highly suggestive that registrogenesis, conventional registrogenesis, is playing some kind of role in shifting these systems to tensor. And indeed, that is my hypothesis, that registrogenesis catalyzes the general tensing of pseudoregister. Basically, I believe register co-opts the register bundle of features, and that pushes pseudoregister to adopt new phonetic cues. So the low register cannot become more lax. So if you get a voiced onset on a low pseudoregister word, it can't become doubly lax because breathy is already tending towards the lax end of the continuum. However, the high pseudoregister can become more tense, so there is room for a voiceless onset and the high pseudoregister to shift from modal to creaky, and that is, I think, what happens. So if we look at contemporary examples from Chong and from Sedang to Oy and Pacoh, they have two different patterns here. In Zhang, we have the persistence of both register and pseudoregister after the devoicing of onset stops. So then the result is a four-term contrast here, where the low pseudoregisters are not creaky, and the high pseudoregisters are creaky, and then the high registers are not breathy, and the low registers are breathy. And that gives us the unusual combination of breathy creaky, which has been of interest to phoneticians in this language. Now in Sedang to Oy and Pacoh, register has been neutralized, so it doesn't cross-cut pseudoregister in the modern languages. But we may hypothesize that the devoicing of stops and the onset of register pushed the pseudoregister to shift to tensor, and then register simply failed to phonemicize thereafter. One more thing that tense-marked pseudoregister languages have in common is the cues that they employ to uphold the contrast, which are voice quality and pitch, but not vowel quality. The vowel quality contrast seems to have been fully surrendered to register. But this is where Pacoh is different. And that brings us back to our third research question. How does Pacoh pseudoregister fit into a typology of pseudoregister formation and evolution? Fascinatingly, Pacoh pseudoregister is unique. It is like tense-marked pseudoregister in that it exhibits the onset-stop devoicing, and the contrast is shifted tensor. We saw that in the H1 minus H2 measures, which indicated no breathiness at all in the low pseudoregister. And we also saw increasing laryngalization across the rhyme, which is reminiscent of what we see in Sedang to Oy and Zhang. But then, like lax-marked pseudoregister, vowel height has remained the most relevant cue. We can model the emergence and evolution of pseudoregister using this general pattern in 3 stages here. First, you get pseudoregister formation out of historical vowel height contrasts. That produces a lax-marked pseudoregister language. From there, you can move on to stage 2, optionally, in which stop devoicing triggers general tensing, and you end up with a tense-marked pseudoregister language. And then there's a third stage where the pseudoregister vowel pairs merge phonetically in terms of their vowel quality, while remaining distinct in terms of voice quality and pitch, and those are left to cue the pseudoregister contrast. So Sedang and Oy and Zhang are all clearly at stage 3, but Pacoh doesn't fit there. It would fit somewhere between stages 2 and 3, because it does show stop devoicing and general tensing, but it certainly does not show phonetic merger of vowel quality among its pseudoregister pairs. We saw how well F1 measures differentiated the pseudoregister pairs in previous slides. So not only does Pacoh not fit in stage 3, it doesn't even seem to be on a trajectory towards stage 3 at this point. And this goes back to the hypothesis I put forward earlier, that Pacoh is likely moving towards a post-pseudoregistral future, where the former pseudoregister contrasts are wholly cued by vowel quality contrasts. Thank you very much for your interest in my presentation. If you do have any questions or comments, you can get in touch with me at my email address here. Thanks again.